Some say that imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Replicating the things you love can be seen as an ode, a way to show that you truly care about a piece of media. Some of the greatest pieces of gaming media were birthed from inspiration. Silent Hill heavily took elements from things like Jacob's Ladder, influenced by the psychological elements of its story and that unique nature of the creatures painted as reflections of a man's psyche. Metal Gear Solid's main character was influenced by the movie Escape from New York, the main character sharing heavy similarities with each other, and the main story of the first game following similar plot beats to the film. Games like Uncharted share a lot with movies like Indiana Jones, a rough and tumble protagonist searching forgotten ruins for lost artifacts. But these examples are all taken from different genres, games that look to other mediums to gather inspiration from. But this can be done within the very medium that you choose to place your media in. These games are often referred to as clones when done poorly. We like to push down those that take other ideas only if they don't succeed. But when a game can pull inspiration off, when they can pull from their sources faithfully to create an entirely new thing, this is the true implementation of imitation. Rule of Rose clearly pulls from its sources, and it has no shame in wearing its inspiration directly on its sleeve. So flagrantly you could see the patches from a mile away. Its camera view, control scheme, combat style, and psychological horror-based story all scream Silent Hill. Silent Hill 1, 2, 3, and 4 had already been released at this time. We were years removed from the main four that are heavily considered to be the best in the Silent Hill canon. This game looks, feels, plays, and acts a lot like a Silent Hill game. The main character is effectively experiencing events that are manifestations of their psyche. They are working through their trauma. We are fighting ghoulish beasts in strange, dirty, and gritty environments. The game carries its atmosphere on its back. We solve puzzles by wandering and looking for items, and most importantly, the game's story is delivered through non-direct means. Without the extras and secrets in the game, the newspaper clippings, the small comments made by characters seemingly offhand, we don't have a full or certain tale in our minds. There are many ways that this game can seem like a ripoff of Silent Hill or even other psychological horror games of that time, but I am certain when I tell you that Rule of Rose has carved a place of its own in the annals of video game horror history. Rule of Rose is one of a kind. Its story is heavily based in theme rather than narrative, showcasing a story of abuse, trauma, bullying, love, fear, and facing your demons. Rule of Rose shares the similarities with its predecessors as a game that creates an atmosphere, but Rule of Rose does this in a way I think no game ever has. It displays some of the best scoring I think I've ever heard in a video game, and it uses moments of silence and sound design to its advantage. The basic premise for the story is its own, and it doesn't end up as just another horror game about a tortured person who regrets their past. I wanted to get this whole part of the video out of the way at the beginning because I've covered Silent Hill heavily on this channel, and I know it can be hard to divorce yourself from the comparisons to those games. But Rule of Rose is its own piece, its own work, its own art, and throughout this video I will be treating it as such, because that is what it deserves. Today, I'd like to dive deep into Rule of Rose. I'll be talking about gameplay, story, mechanics, and everything in between. Spoilers for Rule of Rose. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Rule of Rose. Rule of Rose was developed by Punchline and published by Sony in Japan, Atlas in the US, and 505 Games in Europe. Punchline only ever developed 2 games in its company's history, the game we're talking about today and Tulip, a kissing simulator for the PS2, I guess. The company was originally founded by Yoshiro Kimura, a former employee of Love de Lick. The game was directed by Shuji Ishikawa and produced by Noriyuki Boda. At the time, Punchline only had 25 developers on staff. They were asked by Sony to make a horror game. At the time, Resident Evil clones were pretty massive, and those games had turned the genre on its head. but Punchline wanted to create something different. They wanted to create a psychological horror game, not just another zombie ghost slasher type. One of the earliest ideas for the game was centered around a boy who had been kidnapped. The player would control the boy as he tried to escape from the killer and encounter ghosts of previous children killed by the man. The team eventually landed on a different idea surrounding the mysterious and misunderstood nature of girls. Punchline had members of their team visit Hyde Park in London to gain accuracy and references for certain scenes in the game. Since a large part of the game takes place inside of an airship, the team also contacted the British government to obtain information about their R101 airship. Since the game heavily featured child characters, the team also researched groups of European and American children for the game. They used drawings made by the children reflecting things that made them happy or sad as references for the story. The game went through many stages of trial and error during its development. A lot of time was spent crafting a sense of fear and atmosphere in the game. This was important to the original concept for the game, but was something that the team had to figure out along the way. The combat system was ultimately left underbaked because of time and budget constraints within the team. This was something that the team themselves would go on to admit after release, mostly in response to criticism that the game would receive. The score for the game was composed by Yutaka Minobe, who had worked on Panzer Dragoon Orta and Skies of Arcadia. The Hiroshi Murayama trio also worked on the score, and the vocals were done by Kaori Kondo. Rule of Rose is a game that's really about its themes. The team thought about these beforehand. They were placed there with purpose. Their intention was to talk about the intimate relationships between all people, but also explore the idea of what children look like from an adult's perspective, how that can be terrifying and sort of foreign. Now, we can't really talk about Rule of Rose without talking about its controversy. This game was one of the most controversial at the time for not really a good reason. This all started before the game released. Sony didn't want to publish the game in the US because they wanted it to be tamer if they were going to put their brand name on it. This is the reason that Atlus ended up stepping in and publishing in that region. The developers didn't agree with Sony's decision. They felt that they were trying to portray the way that children act without guilt or sin. Rumors were running rampant that the game contained violence against children, and the British media had picked up the story claiming that children were buried alive in the game. This all came at a time when the discussion around violence in video games was still very prevalent. Years before, Manhunt had hit a massive scandal and had been banned in New Zealand. The panic around video games was still at an all-time high, so something like Rule of Rose was just begging to be targeted. This situation culminated in an EU justice minister publicly attacking the game, calling for its ban and suggesting reform to the PEGI rating system in general. The game's release was eventually cancelled in New Zealand and Australia, and 505 cancelled the UK release for the game. Rule of Rose was released for the Sony PlayStation 2 in Japan on January 19, 2006, in North America on September 12, 2006, and in Europe on November 3, 2006. Before we get into talking about the game, I have a few preliminary notes. The first is on the way that I played Rule of Rose. I used an emulator to play the game, specifically PCSX2. The game ran pretty great in general, though it did take me a bit of setup to get the forced grain to go away. One of the biggest issues with the emulation of this game that I encountered was that cutscenes would not appear if I was using a hardware renderer. They would only appear if I was using software rendering. This issue was apparently fixed in the past, but has popped its head back up again. Luckily, I could switch renderers with a key press, so it wasn't too big of an issue to switch over as the cutscenes started playing. I will also say that I am using a texture replacement patch for the game that ups the fidelity a little bit. The renderer also smooths the game out slightly, so on PC it can end up looking like something that didn't exactly come out in 2006. This all comes down to preference though, and if you like the emulation of the CRT feel, you can get that as well. In the end, this is just what I chose for my playthrough. The second note that I have is on the structure of this review. If you've seen my previous videos on the Silent Hill series, then you'll know what I'm about to say. This game's story shares similarities with Silent Hill, not necessarily in style, theme, or narrative, but in structure. Through the game, we will be given a story with events, twists, turns, and themes, but the full, true story is hidden in the background. By finding memos, hidden extras, and small pieces of information, we will be able to piece together the full story of Rule of Rose. Because of this, I will first take you through a normal playthrough of the game. I will discuss the intricacies of gameplay, the story at hand from a surface-level perspective, and all the other elements that make up this fantastic game. At the end, I will then go back to dive into the true story that's happened in the background, what it really means for this narrative and our cast of characters. Our game truly begins with a story. The classic words, "Once upon a time," start things off for us. A brooding narrator tells us that this will be a story about a precious little girl and her friend, the Princess of the Red Rose. The voice quickly changes to that of a child. The princess was always at her side, but one day the girl's parents died, and she was sent away to a strange house. We see a girl and a boy on a bus traveling in the night, a moth flitting across the solitary light that brightens the cab the two sit in. The boy asks Jennifer, the older girl, to read the story that he gives her. The story is called The Little Princess, but most of the pages are blank. The bus comes to its stop and the boy runs away. Jennifer tries to get the boy's attention, but he's run off into the shadows before she can understand who he is or where he's from. We then get the title card to our first chapter, The Little Princess, which takes place in March of 1930. As we've already covered, this happens to be the title of the storybook that the boy gave us. This book looks handcrafted, homemade, something drawn and written by a child, possibly the boy himself. This continues the story that we heard in the intro. Once upon a time, there was a precious little girl. Her friend, the Princess of the Red Rose, was always at her side. Then one day, her mummy and daddy died suddenly. The princess too disappeared, leaving the girl all alone, and the poor little girl was sent away to a strange house. The rest of the pages are left blank. Each chapter of the game normally begins like this. Jennifer receives a story, one that isn't quite finished yet. Some chapters will see us actually finishing the book and finding an end to the tale. These stories become quite macabre and bleak as the game goes on. We often don't know who the author of these tales are and where the line between reality and fiction is drawn. We're not sure which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Does the story create the reality that we're about to see, or is the story created after the events have already happened? The source of this document is clearly a mystery, but the style of each story also sets the tone for our tale. The graphic nature of some of the images lets the viewer know what they're going to be up against in this section of the game. It's almost a foreboding warning. We now know what's coming, what shock, horror, and atmosphere the author will develop for us. It's telegraphed all here. It's another one of those many moments where we don't want to move forward, but we have to. Push on into the dark because it's scary and because we need to know what lies in those shadows. A text narration on screen then lays out the story our game has for us. These fairy tale comments will often note the narrative, the current situation, thoughts, and feelings of the characters that inhabit our chronicles. The graphics at the top and the bottom of the screen give a flowery sort of ambiance to the words, as if the words are being read directly from a picture book that a child has just opened. But this tone is directly contrasted by the story itself, its ghoulish nature, its bleak themes, and the things actually happening on screen. I will refer to this throughout the rest of this video as the tale speaking to us. Jennifer is now alone. This is where our story truly begins, a mysterious, unthinkable, filthy tale. Jennifer has now resigned herself to these circumstances. She's stepped off a bus in the middle of the night to return to a place from her memories. So Jennifer begins to wander the paths and trails. She meanders through the woods until she finds a fork in the road. Here, she catches a dog's bark off in the distance. We can find a small shack with a padlock that's been unlocked. Inside, we can find a dog collar with the name Brown on it. A slip of paper is tied to the collar, a handmade boarding pass for some sort of fish-shaped ship. The name of the society that gives these passes out is scrawled on the side, near their logo, the Red Crayon Aristocrats. We can take both of these items and head back up the hill. There we see the boy from earlier dashing through the gate to the large house. The tale itself notes that Jennifer feels that this place is familiar in some way, but she can't quite make it out. The door to the front gate is locked, but some children are inside, beating an old sack, and something is definitely inside the sack. It's also worth noting that the kids are wearing bags over their heads, obscuring their identities for now. This image clearly scares Jennifer, and she backs away from the gate, forced to take the side entrance to the mansion. As we walk along the path, children can be seen peeking over the stone wall to our right. They are watching. Everyone is watching. The house has eyes, and it notes our arrival. The door to the back is locked. No one is admitted inside without a pass, but luckily we already have one. We can use our boarding pass here to gain entrance into the estate. Heading towards the house, we can see chalk marks on the wall, referencing the legend of Stray Dog, who gives the children sweets. Outside the front door is a blood stain from the children beating whatever was inside the sack. When Jennifer enters the house, the door is locked behind her, and we can hear a child laughing somewhere in the shadows. The tale speaks to us once again, noting that Jennifer can feel the eyes of the house on her everywhere. But despite this, she is all alone, not only physically, but emotionally, in spirit as well. We chase the small boy through the house, eventually coming upon the filth room. Here, a strange doll is tied to a pillar, and we can interact with a bucket knight. These odd creatures are just some metal tied to a pole, a ramshackle knight barely held together by strings. But they're unique because they're the only ones in this story that want to listen to Jennifer, that will hear the sad, unlucky wretch's tale. This is where we save our game. In this room, we can also find an old photo, one that shows the residents of this orphanage, many children taken care of by 2 adults. We continue to chase the boy throughout the mansion, only to arrive in a dusty attic filled with dirty medical tools. It's worth noting here that we can explore the mansion very thoroughly right from the beginning of the game. For those who want to explore, to find those details hidden and tucked away, you're able to do this right from the start. We won't technically be at the mansion from the start, but we will be there thematically for the entire game. Exploring the mansion from the get-go is kind of essential for the environments to just hit a little extra. It won't spoil the game if you miss it, but some of the details will be lost upon you later in the story. When we get to the attic, we find the boy perched atop a homemade throne, covered in red roses, lit by candles. Jennifer approaches him and he calls her a slowpoke, but seems to already know her, saying that she's always like this. He wants Jennifer to read him the rest of the story. When we open back up The Little Princess, we find it has new details added to its ending. And the poor little girl was sent away to a strange house. At her new home, the Aristocrat Club lived by the rule of Rose, but the girl found herself very much alone. Suddenly, a PA system cuts into this encounter. A woman over the speaker says that the funeral will now begin, and all are asked to gather round. We see children standing over a grave, quoting the often biblically attributed phrase, which actually originates from the Book of Common Prayer. Either origin, it references man's own mortality, a stark reminder that we are human, time is finite, and the end comes for everyone. Jennifer is ushered to the funeral, and without her knowledge, the boy has disappeared. We then hear a dog barking somewhere off in the distance. Jennifer finds a shovel standing in a grave outside. Jennifer begins to use the shovel to furiously dig up the grave, concerned with what could be inside. She eventually reveals the coffin underneath the dirt and opens it up to show a brown sack closed in the wooden casket. At the same time, the other children at the orphanage are gathering water and begin pouring it on Jennifer in a ritual of humiliation. Jennifer weeps as the PA system turns on once again. The woman speaking seems to be addressing passengers on a flight, directing them to take storage to a specific place. Jennifer is then pushed into the coffin, and the lid is closed as she's carried somewhere else. This was one of the most controversial scenes from the game, apparently, and was a large piece that people attached onto to try and get the game banned. Now, of course, no children were ever buried alive. Jennifer wasn't even being buried alive here. She was being carried off somewhere else. That's not to say it isn't horrible, but Jennifer herself isn't even a child. She's an adult. Most of the people that were upset with the game and trying to seek out a ban probably hadn't even seen this part of the game. Most information that came out said that the specific justices that were seeking action hadn't played the game at all and had only seen trailers or heard about parts of the game. But again, this all came at a time when the violence panic in games was huge. Politicians were looking for any sort of misstep in the gaming field to be able to raise a platform on, or just to have something to publicly bash. The actual event itself seems closer to some sort of hazing ritual or initiation into an elite society. As we'll see later in the story, this is exactly what that is. Jennifer is being initiated into the Red Crayon Aristocrats. Many different pagan and Gnostic traditions across the world use ritual initiation as a way to either transfer power or haze the initiate into the organization. Plenty of secret societies and groups have also used these methods to add members into their ranks. This requires a sort of sacrifice, whether based in emotional humility or a physical take. With that, we start our second section of the game. The story jumps to April of 1930 to tell the tale of the unlucky Clover Field. Jennifer wakes up in a dark and dirty room, specifically the filth room, the same room that we found the bucket knight in while exploring the mansion. The place is grimy, filled with useless storage and the empty coffin that Jennifer was transported here in. We can try to escape by wiggling the thumbsticks, but it won't work. Someone comes over the PA to address Jennifer directly. They ask us a few questions, of which the answers don't really matter. The general message, though, is that Jennifer has done something bad, and she needs to see the consequences of her actions. Someone is watching this ordeal through a hole in the wall. During this conversation, we're also given the large setup to the game. The organization that we've just been sort of admitted into, the Red Crayon Aristocrats, requires a gift each month. We have to find and offer up a specific gift that the society chooses, and if we don't manage to get it, Jennifer will be killed. The voice over the speaker tells us that he is the prince, and the prince rules around this place. He laughs maniacally, feeding off and taking joy in Jennifer's dismay.
You will follow my orders or else. For I am the prince, and the prince rules. This is your life, but you'll play by my rules.
This is torture for her, but there's only one way forward, to follow the rules and not die. A pair of scissors on a string is then lowered by someone in the shadows, and we are cut free of our binds. We are congratulated on our new admittance into the Aristocrat Club. The flashing white text on screen certainly doesn't feel like a reflection of the reality that we've just woken up to. The filth room that we now have access to explore will be a sort of small base of operations for Jennifer. Here we can save at the bucket knight nearby and also store items in the trash can. Just like any other survival horror game, we have a finite inventory and can throw items inside of a storage to free up space. This, of course, is a balance and mechanic that we'll have to contend with for the entire game. Do we take a larger variety of weapon or healing items, or important secret items that might come up later? It's always a gamble, but it comes down to preference, whether you'd like to play it more safe or a little riskier. The bucket knight and the storage bin both have a place in the world of the game, though, as well. The bucket knight has aged and cannot remember the past. Jennifer cannot remember what the knight refers to, but she should. The knight calls for Jennifer to tell him her memories so that they can recall and put the pieces together as a pair. As we head outside through the halls, we will see posters, handmade for the Aristocrats Club. Making our way through this ship, we will eventually come upon a top floor, where the entrance to the club lies. Jennifer can find the current rankings of the social hierarchy, where she lists at the bottom as a beggar. We can also find the rule of gifts posted on the wall. All members must find one gift per month. Tardiness, stealing, and cheating are prohibited. The gift required this month is a beautiful butterfly, one per person. Eventually, we will realize that we're not in the mansion anymore. Though the filth room quite resembles the one from the mansion, and it is sort of the same one, we're now on a massive airship. This is where the bulk of the game will take place. We're flying through the skies, and strangely, more rooms than just the filth room match up with the ones from the orphanage. Here we can explore the ship to our liking, for the most part at least. We can meet some of the children aboard, we can even talk to Hoffman, the headmaster of the orphanage, who only calls us a dirty wretch.
Dirty wretch. Why are you always shirking your duties?
Most of the people we talk to at this point will either blatantly ignore Jennifer or call her a filthy name. Traveling back downstairs, we will find a butterfly that promptly flies away, and we see a girl run off after it. Walking through the halls of the airship, we find a dog that's been brutally tied up. It's whimpering, but we don't have the ability to save it just yet. We can meet some more of the children here, like Xavier and Diana. We can even talk to Martha, one of the only other adults on the ship.
Filthy wretch.
Upstairs, though, a small girl is weeping over a broken butterfly. Olivia seems to have found a gift and then lost it before she could get her hands on it. Olivia will stab the butterfly with a fork before walking away and giving us a foreboding warning.
You deserve to be gobbled up.
This fork can be used as our weapon and is the first one that we encounter in the game. We can also pick up the butterfly, which we wrongly assume will serve as our gift to the club for the month. We can take the fork all the way back to the gift box, but on the way we will encounter our first enemy. These are imps, small, terrifying, warped creatures that will attack us throughout our playthrough. Before we talk about the rest of the game, we should probably talk about the combat of Rule of Rose. I usually do this a lot earlier in my videos, but Rule of Rose does take a bit to even introduce the concept to the player. It had gotten to the point where I had assumed that maybe combat wasn't even going to be introduced. Now, the main gameplay of Rule of Rose usually centers around solving puzzles, gathering items, and using them in certain places. Rule of Rose functions very much like a horror game of its era. Imagine a Silent Hill or a Clock Tower. We will be investigating or exploring many different areas, all of which house items that we must find to progress, puzzles that we must solve to move on, but also its fair share of enemies to defeat and weapons to equip. Now, the combat definitely isn't as present as some of the games in the genre, and it mostly takes a back seat. A lot of our time will be spent investigating the environments that we're journeying through. Like I said before, a lot of the story is told through optional memos that we piece together by examining objects, picking up things in the environment, or finding secrets. Now, I personally think that Rule of Rose takes this even a step further than other games of its ilk. It does not really tell us what can or can't be investigated, not that many of these games do, but its competition seems to make it a little more obvious than Rule of Rose. I don't necessarily think that it's a downside, though. The game doesn't really want the details to be the main focus of your time with it. It's more concerned about your feelings with the story, about pushing emotion onto the player, or even letting these things crop up naturally. It's more focused on theme than it is timeline. The gameplay, though, is pretty simple. We'll normally have to find keys to access new areas, find gifts for the month to progress to the next chapter, or generally just solve the mystery that we're currently on. There will be another big part of gameplay and combat that we'll unlock shortly, but we'll talk about that when we get there. The combat itself is pretty simple, even for the standards of the genre. We can equip a weapon and use it to attack enemies. We orient our character in the direction that we want to attack. With our tank controls in hand, we hold down the R1 button and press X to swing our weapon. With most weapons, we'll do a normal swing a few times before our character swings in a larger arc, usually doing a little more damage and knocking enemies down. It does seem like there is a stomping mechanic in the game to be able to attack enemies while they're downed, but I could never get it to work for me for whatever reason. I tried it just about every time, and I think I only ever saw it damage an enemy once. The combat system has its own issues, especially with balance. Certain enemies can just repeatedly down you over and over again. Some are just difficult to make it through because of tedium rather than challenges. Boss battles in particular can just become slow slugfests where you're waiting for an enemy to do a certain attack so you can hit them once and run away, whittling down their health bar over a long period of time. Hits don't seem to register a lot of the time, which is just an issue with hitboxes for enemies in general. There's a lot of issues, and the systems are half-baked overall. This was something, like I said before, that the developers themselves admitted to. They just didn't have the time or resources near the end of the development cycle to fully polish the combat in the way that they wanted to. The combat is probably the worst part of the game overall, and ends up being something that you have to contend with, rather than something you look forward to doing or actually enjoy. I say that with the caveat, though, that this game's other parts make it worthy enough to be played on their own. Of course, the poor combat immediately makes it something that's not perfect, almost unfinished, but the other parts are just so impressive that the combat just becomes one of those things we don't talk about. Enemies themselves have multiple different varieties. Most are denoted by the type of animal head that they have on. Rat enemies, goat-headed foes, even strange bird creatures that will peck at us from above. The variety isn't massive though, and most of the enemies outside of bosses are dealt with in the same way, trying your best to not get hit and hitting back as much as you can. Some enemies will jump on us and cling to Jennifer, and we'll have to shake our thumbsticks quickly to shake the enemy off in turn. The first enemy we encounter, I didn't actually fight. A lot of the enemies in Rule of Rose can actually be run away from. We can just pass them by and not really have an issue. There will be forced encounters later where we will be diverted into an area and locked inside, and the only way out is to kill the enemies in front of us. As we head upstairs towards the club's headquarters, we can hear a child reciting a story. The simple tale is about an unlucky girl, most likely Jennifer. All she wanted was to go to a clover field. She finds ascending numbers of clovers until she gets to the 4-leaf clover, but she was too unlucky. We can now try and give the green butterfly to the gift box, but the gift is rejected, as whoever is behind the door does not think that the gift is beautiful enough. Nearby, we find a 1-leaf clover key, which will gain us access into a door on the other side of the ship. On the way out, Jennifer is met by a strange man she's never seen, who hands her a new story. This story is called The Cloverfield. It ends up being the same story that we heard the girl reading in the library. In a nearby room, we can find the other side of the wall to the filth room, and it has a small crack that we saw someone watching Jennifer through before. The button nearby will lower the pair of scissors that helped us escape. We can then take these and free the dog that's been tied up. We can also use the collar we found at the beginning of the game and put it on the dog. The dog's name is Brown, and he's very happy to have his name tag back. Brown is a very special companion and actually represents a large change in gameplay for Rule of Rose. It's probably also the most unique part about the game's mechanics. Brown will help us out in combat, attacking enemies and not actually doing damage, but he can scare them and stop them from attacking at times. This can be incredibly useful against enemies that have relentless attacks that we just can't seem to dodge, or even when we're overwhelmed by sheer numbers. We can also order Brown to stay if we don't want him to participate in combat. If Brown takes too much damage, then we'll have to heal him after battle. But Brown also will massively help us in the story moving forward. We can equip certain items in our inventory in the Find slot. With these equipped, Brown can be given their scent and track a similar item or one connected to it nearby. Finding one of the connected items will unlock one of the entries on the list of connected items. This lets us know beforehand how many items can be found using this one. Now, of course, this is used a lot in the main story just to be able to progress and find what we need to continue on, but it's also used a lot to find secret items or even extra healing. It's an incredibly unique mechanic and has a very good implementation in Rule of Rose, but I also think Brown has many other implications. As we'll see moving forward, Brown has a ton of implications and impact on the story, but he also represents something larger. The developers said that they added Brown to the game to balance out Jennifer's helpless and unhappy nature. This was in the vein of making the game more enjoyable, and I really think it works. Dogs are, as we all know, the archetypal representation of a friend. They're called man's best friend. They're innocent protectors. We view them as cute and harmless, but they serve, they protect, they help the person that they're bonded to. The relationship between man and dog is not just transactional, though. The two are bonded, and here Brown represents a light in the dark. Jennifer is lost and scared. Ever since the story began, she was described as the unlucky girl, the dirty wretch, the poor girl. She's been teased, humiliated, bullied, and tortured. It seems at this point as if we're playing someone's sick idea of a game. Jennifer isn't sure why she's here or what she's even supposed to be doing. She isn't even really sure where she is yet or who is with her. With so much uncertainty, so much fear, and so much confusion, she needs someone that can stand beside her, stand true and strong, and help her out through the dark. That's why Brown is here, to guide her through the shadows, to brave this horror with no fear or trepidation, just to help. This is also an incredibly easy way to make us care about a character immediately. When we see dogs in games, we want to protect them, we want to take care of them, and we definitely don't want anything bad to happen to them. With Brown, we can make our way back toward the Clover rooms, but when we arrive, we see Martha ripped up the stairs by some imps. We can grab her hat and make our way into the first Clover door, the one Clover door, the only one we have a key for at this point. In this room, we can fashion together the 2-leaf clover key, as you can probably guess, gaining us access to that respective door. We are accosted by a voice in a strange room, and by finding some objects that Brown can track the scent of, we find the 3rd key. This leads us into another set of rooms, where we will find Amanda, one of the girls on the ship, who seems to have found her own beautiful butterfly. When we leave the room, though, Amanda leaves with her butterfly and leaves the case behind. We can have Brown track the scent of the case and find a butterfly of our own. We track it back to the main room and we see scenes of the gorgeous creature juxtaposed against the imps beating Martha in the other room with brooms. They flood into the room with their weapons in hand and begin to attack. We have to get out of there, though, with our butterfly in hand. We have to make our way back across the ship, whose hallways are full of enemies at this point. Really quickly, I want to talk about the horror of Rule of Rose. To be honest, I don't actually think Rule of Rose is that scary. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think it does horror very well. I think it has its own brand of horror and ends up very far on the side of atmospheric horror or psychological horror. I do think Rule of Rose has its moments, and it builds an atmosphere, a tension, but I definitely wouldn't call the game terrifying or scary. The word I would specifically use is uncomfortable. There are a lot of things that the game does to make us feel unsettled. It's the feeling of shifting around in your chair. Something just doesn't feel right. The art style and filthy environments, the character models and designs, the graphics and textures, everything just really works to make a world that you don't want to be in. But the fact that it isn't scary doesn't take away from its quality, because both things essentially do the same thing, but through different methods. A scary game will make you anxious in your bones. You want to stop because you're afraid of moving forward. An uncomfortable game means that something isn't sitting well. You don't necessarily think something is going to jump out of the shadows and attack you at any moment, but there's a constant tension pushing you away from the game in your mind. The biggest feature of the game that does this is its sound design. The effects, music, and leveling all create an audio landscape that your ears just reject immediately. There are so many sounds in this game that are just disgusting. Even the scene of Amanda grabbing the butterfly and hearing the gelatinous sounds of the wings in its body is just, ugh. Not to mention the performances from the actors are all specifically made to feel grating. The wailing of the children we hear from down the hallways, the loud giggles signaling that we're being watched, the screeching laughter of the voice over the PA system that tells us that we're not getting out of here anytime soon. It's all so bleak, so monstrous, and a lot of those effects are happening with our ears and not our eyes. I'm not going to go very in-depth with the music of the game, I'll just talk about it briefly. This is mostly because I view this OST as a sort of large piece rather than individual tracks. The songs themselves don't really feel that distinct outside of a few examples, and again, please don't take this as a negative, because the soundtrack here is one of my favorite parts of the game. It gives Rule of Rose a completely different feeling. The whole thing is very orchestra heavy, violins and cellos doing most of the work here. It creates tension, builds atmosphere, pushing on that panic and fear at the right moments, and it punishes. It's relentless, and just a beautiful work overall. There's also an incredibly cinematic quality to it. The music has real artistry, and the game wouldn't be what it is without it. We end up depositing the butterfly in the gift box, and the children behind the door debate whether they should accept it or not. They decide to give Jennifer a break since she's new. We enter the door that has been hidden to us all this time, and Jennifer is kicked inside at the last second. We find a royal throne room, much like the one we saw in the attic of the orphanage, but much more decked out and full of real, actual people. This is the gathering of the aristocrat club that we've heard so much about. Diana steps off the throne and approaches Jennifer, curtsying before lowering herself. She then belittles Jennifer, telling her that she is worse than nothing, her gift is worthless, and Diana seems to take pleasure in this bullying. Amanda is called over, a child who is clearly in the lower ranks, but she is instructed to use a rat stick on Jennifer. A rat is wrapped on the end of the stick and it is shoved in Jennifer's face as she has to bear the grotesque nature of the creature. This doesn't go on long before Jennifer passes out and wakes up in the same room with a boy looking over her. He asks if she's yet remembered what she's done. It's clear that Jennifer has lost some memories. There are things from her past here that she can't quite recall. The boy says that once Jennifer fully remembers what she did, the game will end. He tells us to get away, and we begin the next chapter of the story in May 1930, Sir Peter. We wake up in the filth room and find a note from Amanda apologizing for what she had to do. She asks us to meet her where you can see the sky. She's clearly referencing the top of the airship here, which we can access by taking an elevator up. Out here, Amanda is crying, sobbing even, off in the distance. She crawls towards Jennifer and begs for Jennifer to reconcile her guilt. She doesn't want to feel bad for this and feels like it was something that the club made her do. She tells her that when the club makes her use the stick on Amanda, she won't be upset. It seems that Amanda is clearly the child of the group that is picked on, that is made to feel like she's going to be moved up in the hierarchy, but never is. She's manipulated, bullied, and then for a short time treated well, and she's suffering because of it. At the end of this scene, we can see that Diana is watching the whole ordeal. Back on the ship, Amanda is preparing a gift for Jennifer, but it isn't ready yet. Outside, a note is thrown at us which tells Amanda and Jennifer to both report upstairs to the gift box. There we find that there's an emergency. A rabbit named One-Horned Peter has run away and we're tasked with finding him. We can travel to the filth room and the strange man from earlier says that he's written a story for Joshua before walking off. Inside there are scrawlings of fish and something has begun growing in the middle of the floor. And here we can find Peter's droppings, which we can obviously use to track Peter, but we also find the story for this chapter, Sir Peter. Sir Peter went out for a stroll. Sir Peter, put in a cage, had to hold it in. Sir Peter needs to go right now, doesn't want to sin. Sir Peter bagged and whisked away before he found a toilet. Goodbye, Peter, goodbye. We actually find Peter pretty quickly, but he runs away, and we have to trace him throughout the entire ship. We track him into a stall from which he runs again. Eventually, we track him down to a room where imps are hitting a sack with brooms. There's blood covering the floor here, and Jennifer walks around to investigate. Before she has the chance to, she hears someone talking nearby, an adult. Jennifer is blamed by him for the mess, and he walks towards us, attacking with his pointer. This is the first boss of the game, and seems to be Mr. Hoffman, the teacher and headmaster. He's clearly bound and warped, holding his hand to his face and wielding a pointer to attack Jennifer with. Like most of the bosses in Rule of Rose, he is quite annoying. The main strategy here is to wait for his larger, slower attacks and hit him once or twice before getting out. We don't do much damage though, so this takes quite some time to pull off. We can actually hit a couple times when he's just running around, but we run the risk of taking some pretty big damage from him. Once we defeat him, we can pick up a warm bag nearby. We can then head back to the gift box where Amanda is waiting for us to turn in Peter. A task completed, sort of. We hand over the warm bag, and Peter is actually still alive and runs into the room with Amanda chasing after. As Jennifer heads inside, we can see that the gift box has been destroyed. She's suddenly transported to the woods where the rest of the club seems to be holding some sort of ritual. Amanda and Jennifer aren't allowed to get up close because of their class status. The bag is raised high above by the children. Before they can get going though, Diana notices the two girls in the bushes and calls out Jennifer. Meg reads off a message directly from the Princess of the Red Rose, who we haven't actually seen yet. Jennifer is to be rewarded because she was the one who found Peter. She moves up on social rank to irritating, clearly a massive step up, whereas Amanda is lowered to miserable. She is then given the rat stick and forced to dole out the same punishment that she received. This is something she doesn't want to do and is terribly uncomfortable with, especially considering the rat has died and is crawling with bugs. This causes Jennifer to pass out as well, and she wakes back up in the throne room with the boy overlooking her. Because Jennifer still doesn't understand the things she's done, she's told to read 3 stories sitting in front of her. We get to choose which story we read first, and this determines the next part of the game we play. This doesn't ultimately matter because we will still see all 3 stories in the end, but I chose the Goat Sisters first. Each of these stories are at first incomplete, and finishing the small scenario will see us finding an end to these tales. The Goat Sisters is as follows. Little sister wrote a letter, ba ba. Big sister munched it up, ba ba. Little sister studied her notes, ba ba. Big sister tore them to shreds, ba ba. Little sister wanted to read Big Sister the letter, so she fetched it from her sister's stomach. But with Big Sister dead in a pool of amber blood, who is there to read the letter to? Ba ba. As we read the story, we are transported to a room where Meg is sitting in a chair, thinking. She tells Jennifer that something must be very important to her and that she should go find it. The obvious piece of this room is the large sack in the center, which has something inside that we can't see. Outside of this room, we can find the Club Pledge, which serves as a vow for the aristocrats. We also find notes on Stray Dog here, the mythological figure that we saw drawings of at the beginning of the game. He's apparently a monster that's been described to the rest of the club by the princess as big, strong, scarred, loyal, talkative, cleanly, and he kidnaps children who don't do their chores, so a bit of a mixed bag. We eventually find a love letter that is from Meg to Diana, the former clearly having feelings for her friend. We eventually find Diana talking about the letters she's been receiving, and she wants us to find the other half of a torn one. Nearby, we can find Meg's notebook, which has quite a lot of information. The girl herself is very studious and takes quite a bit of notes. She has information on manners to be displayed in front of the higher ranks, plans for torture devices, and a page on secrets of the land of imps, which has been torn out, of course. The end to this short story comes when we find the other half of the torn love letter that Meg gave Diana. It's been tied to a goat body, which was stuffed inside of a clock. When Meg sees that people have found the letter, it's blamed on Jennifer, and she is given punishment for the crime that she didn't commit. Jennifer is stuffed inside of one of Meg's torture devices, a bag with a slot at the top so that the children can drop bugs inside. Just saying, this is possibly the worst thing I could ever imagine. When Jennifer wakes up, she finds the other half of the note and completes the goat sister's story. After the sister rips out the letter from the other one's stomach, the final page says, "Even true love is shredded by conflict." This story clearly represents Diana and Meg and the unrequited feelings that the one girl had for the other. Jennifer gains some sort of memory from this, a promise she made to a friend, and decides to write it on a chalkboard so that she wouldn't forget it. True love. With this, we're back in the throne room, ready to choose another story. The next one I chose was the Bird of Happiness. Once, a girl found a big box. The Bird of Happiness was inside. The bird would take her to Foreverland, or so she hoped. Each box was smaller than the last. In a cramped, dark space, she finally found her little bird, but it was far too little and far too late. The bird was long dead. It had met a bloody fate. The end. As Jennifer is reading the story, she looks up to notice that she's in a room with Eleanor. She once again asks if Jennifer has found the things so dear to her, just as Meg did in the last story. As we exit the room, we overhear a conversation between Meg and Diana, seemingly discussing Jennifer or one of the other girls on the ship. One of them drops a feather as they leave, which seems pretty important considering that the gift this month is the Bird of Happiness. We can find bird drawings on the walls and track these to find a long line of bird feathers on the ground. We can follow these to a bathroom stall where Jennifer hides and then overhears another conversation between Diana and Meg. They're talking about another girl again, and Diana and Meg both claim to not like the girl at all, and whatever they did to her, she deserved it. We head outside, and somehow they knew we were listening. They already know that we're looking for the Bird of Happiness, which is apparently in a room nearby, but they don't remember where. We then find a room with a box and a code to unlock it. We can find a map nearby that will give us the code to unlock the box. Inside, we'll find a diet chart for the mayors of Birdie Town, which will give us another number to unlock another box. You can probably already see where this is going. This level requires us to unlock each of the boxes from the story, boxes within boxes. By piecing together a bird sketch, we will find a drawing of a bird family. The last box will contain a piece of cloth, which is wrapping something, and Eleanor arrives. It's assumed to be her dead bird in the cloth. She takes the bird back while crying, and clearly thinks that it was us. We then see her walk upstairs as we're transported to the beginning room once again. Here we find the completed version of Bird of Happiness. After the end is the moral. Everlasting happiness is a joke. Jennifer then writes the memory that she took from this, everlasting, on the chalkboard. We're transported back to the throne room with one more story left, Mermaid Princess. A long, long time ago, the mermaid princess fell in love with a human prince. But for years, her love went unrequited. Before long, she was old and decrepit, all alone even on the day of her death. The poor, poor princess of the Sea Kingdom. Who'd ever want to become an ugly woman like that? Jennifer arrives in a room with a fish tank, as Diana cleans the other side. Apparently the fish has gone missing, and Diana tells Jennifer to look for her own precious thing, just as the other girls did. At the gift box, we can see Olivia whining at the new gift for the month, which is an unmarried mermaid, which she doesn't believe is real. The girls downstairs are also discussing the fact that there are no such thing as mermaids, and apparently they did something that they had to create one. They leave behind a fish scale after they leave, which we can track with Brown's scent detecting abilities. We end up seeing Clara and Hoffman heading deeper into the ship together. We can find some curious things farther into the ship, like a decapitated fish head and meat cleaver nearby. This leads us to confront the second boss of Rule of Rose, the mermaid herself. This is possibly the most annoying and most difficult boss in the game. The mermaid will drop down from the ceiling and swipe at Jennifer. She'll also spew an arc of vomit at us, which will damage us as long as we're standing in it. Our goal is to get behind her and attack a couple of times before she swings her arms around and knocks us down, or before she sprays acid all over us. The tedious part is the bed in the middle of the room. This provides an obstacle a lot of the time for actually getting to the boss. The attacks of the enemy also, once again, require us to have a short offense, which really creates an incredibly long fight time for this encounter. Everything becomes so dragged out, just like the rest of the bosses in the game. This one is jacked up to 10 though, and just takes forever. It was really the only boss that I didn't care for at all in the game. It was mostly just a frustrating experience in the end. When the mermaid is defeated, she drops to the bed, turning into a small doll. Hoffman is then seen chastising Diana for stealing the fish, and he's definitely not handling things in the right way. He thinks that she stole his fish from the tank. Diana is disgusted at Hoffman after the encounter, and she turns her eye toward Jennifer. She thinks that it was Jennifer's fault and steals the mermaid doll, putting it into the fish tank. We're then taken back to the original room with the tank beside us. We find the mermaid, which has been fashioned from half a fish and a handmade doll. There's a piece of paper inside which finishes the story that we read at the beginning. At the end, we get a new line. I am yours, even in death. Jennifer finally adds this to her chalkboard. I am yours. We're then taken back to the throne room, but the boy is gone. A new chapter begins at this point. June, the gingerbread house. Jennifer is outside in a rose garden, a place that is familiar to her, but also foreign. Brown is also gone, nowhere to be found, leaving Jennifer lost and alone in this place. We head up the path to a house, and inside we can see a ghostly figure of a man. We find the room of a male child that looks to be abandoned. A newspaper scrap on the ground tells us that children have been going missing in the area. Downstairs, a man tells us that it's almost our bedtime. He leaves the room, saying goodnight to Joshua. We're then left in the basement room. Reading notes, we can find that a girl named Wendy was writing to someone else named Joshua. She wanted to run away with him and take him away from this scary place. We can even find a set of boys' clothes laid out in the bed. Another newspaper clipping is on the wall detailing an airship that's gone missing. We can get a teddy bear from the top of the dresser, and a girl will appear at the window to help us out. The girl says that Jennifer should leave with her before the dangerous man comes back. She also wants to grab something of his before they leave. When we head back down the path, the girl is incredibly excited to be with Jennifer forever. She even trades her rose brooch for the teddy bear that Jennifer picked up inside. She decides to name the teddy bear Joshua. The two decide to renew their pact. Everlasting true love, I am yours. If you remember, these were the words that Jennifer recalled from the chalkboard in the stories that we just went through. Jennifer wakes back up in the throne room as the boy runs off. We're still on the airship. Maybe that was all just a dream. For now, we start a new chapter. October 1930, Rag Princess sews. There's an emergency on the gift box now. Joshua the bear is missing. The person who finds him will be given a red crayon and invited to join the aristocrat club. Jennifer is then reunited with Brown, a very touching moment for this bleak story. We head downstairs to find the strange man once again, who thinks that Joshua will love the story that he just wrote for him. Rag Princess is the new story, set on the ground just nearby. Once upon a time, there was a girl who sewed rags, day in, day out. The stench of the rags seeped into her clothes. Her stepsisters wore beautiful dresses and went to the ball. The girl stayed at home, and her jealousy festered. One day, a fairy godmother came, cast a spell upon the girl, and said, "Sew yourself an ash-gray dress. Then you can go to the ball like your stepsisters." The girl patched together the sooty rags, and that's how she became the Rag Princess. A very stinky princess indeed. She stunk up the whole town, in fact. No girl who stunk so would be allowed into the ball. I'll make that girl wear this awful dress myself. And thus the Rag Princess and the girl in the rag dress became play pals. Amanda then tells us she knows who took Joshua the bear. Wendy apparently has him, who is always sick in bed. We can head to the sick room to find Wendy on the floor. Diana had already been here, accusing her of taking the bear. Jennifer helps her back up into the bed and heads out. Diana then asks us where Amanda went to. She decides that we'd be better off searching for Joshua the bear immediately. We can track him to the elevator, but the power goes out and we're forced to restart the generator. This section is kind of a pain because we have to work our way across the entire ship in the dark. It's not pitch black, but it definitely isn't the best conditions for being able to see. When we eventually get to the generator, of course, the handle is missing, so we have to find it. Once we do, we can restart the power and head all the way back. Now that we have access to the elevator, we can climb the ladder and we appear somewhere above ground, as if we were underground the entire time. Amanda is up here, beating something with a stick furiously with rage. When she turns around, she acts as if she's innocent. She's done nothing. It seems like she was just taking her rage out on a doll. Amanda has the bear and decides to give it to Jennifer. When Jennifer wakes up, the boy has stolen the bear, and we can head to the middle level of the ship. Here we chase the boy around, trying to get the bear back from him as he toys with Jennifer. We're forced to defeat many waves of imps, and when we finally make it back to the gift box, the bear is sitting on the ground. Jennifer offers up the bear and heads inside. Diana beckons her into the shadows, and the place lights up. Everyone is here. Amanda whispers to Diana, implicating Jennifer in stealing the bear in the first place. Jennifer is regardless given a red crayon and fully admitted into the club, into the higher social ranks. But as the children leave, imps begin to flood into the room. A swarm of them overtake Jennifer in probably one of the scariest scenes in the entire game.
No, please.
We then begin the next chapter in November 1930, the funeral. We hear Hoffman talking over the PA system, talking about spring cleaning. Jennifer is tied up to a pole with red crayon marks all over her dress. We can't escape like we did last time. Brown is actually sleeping beside us, and we have to wake him up by calling him to us 3 times. He helps Jennifer out of her binds, and we're actually back inside of the orphanage, in the mansion, no longer flying above the skies in a foreign airship. We pick up the red crayon and begin moving throughout the house, only to find Hoffman ordering the girls to go clean the place. He calls Jennifer to his office after she played hooky for the day. When we head inside, he just once again calls Jennifer a dirty wretch, asking her why she doesn't just do her job like the other kids. Making our way throughout the wider house, none of the children will actually talk to Jennifer. They'll all coldly ignore her. In the basement, we can find some strange things, odd equipment, and another club pledge. Through the house, notes will be thrown at us, each saying something particularly nasty like, liar, you get what you deserve, apologize by dying. When we finally find Clara, Hoffman takes her into another room to dole out punishment to her, and it seems particularly nefarious. We're eventually directed to come to the hall where an announcement has been made that cleaning time is over. The children are directed to go to bed as night falls outside. Jennifer reads the final note tossed at her. This month's gift is her, filthy Jennifer. Notes appear all over the walls and the house changes. Everywhere is now flooded with imps and other types of enemies. The door to the garden is locked and we have to kill 2 of each animal type enemy to unlock it. This means 2 rats, goats, and pigs. When we do this, the door is opened and Wendy is outside. She lovingly pets Brown, but notes that he is filthy. She also tells us there will be a club meeting after this. We can head over to the coffin to find the funeral story. Once upon a time, a girl found a hole in the ground in the yard. The little people came out and told her the news. Today is the day of your funeral. If you don't like it, then you must sacrifice your friend, who wants to be buried alive. So the girl did what she had to do and buried her best friend. Well, I wouldn't want to be her best friend. At this point, the imps are all gone and Brown seems to have disappeared. On the way upstairs, Jennifer sees Brown at the different landing points, but each time it turns out to be some sort of doll rather than the dog itself. Eventually arriving in the attic, it seems like Brown might already be gone. The imps are sweeping him up, but again, it's a small doll. Then the throne room appears, and Wendy reveals herself to be the Princess of the Rose. Amanda tells Jennifer that her friend is in the bag, that the only tie that she had to this world is gone. The only thing she had has perished. Jennifer then transforms into a child and stands up to Wendy, smacking her in the face. She lashes out at her and the rest of the club. She hates herself for taking this long to stand up to the rest of the girls. The next chapter takes place in December 1930, Stray Dog and the Lying Princess. It's raining at the mansion and the strange man is standing outside. Jennifer wakes up once again in the orphanage. A story called Stray Dog and the Lying Princess is laying on the bed. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who told lies. She liked to scare the other girls by screaming, "Stray dog is coming." But soon, everyone stopped being scared. They hated the way that she lied. One day, the girl came home screaming, "Stray dog is coming, really?" Everyone thought it was just another lie, except this time, it was no lie at all, and so they were all gobbled up. The end. When Jennifer exits the room to find the children, she sees that they are curtsying her arrival. She's greeted into a room with her new servants and asked for forgiveness by everyone that's wronged her. She's now been named princess of the new club. They're begging her to guide them as they now have no leader without Wendy. But the displaced princess is now outside in the rain. When Jennifer heads to the hall, the main door is opened and the boy is here with Stray Dog, a terrifying man with a chain around his neck. This is our final boss of the game, and he's pretty easy compared to everything else we've gone up against. He's quite the same as the first boss. He'll do a big wind-up, slow attack that we can take advantage of. We can get a couple hits in and back away before waiting for another attack. The strategy ends up the same as all the other fights, though, and it still has the same issues. But halfway through the fight, Brown returns to save us. We have our companion back. When we defeat Stray Dog, we head outside to find children's clothes scattered all over the ground. The story came true, and the children were gobbled up. The boy is in the doorway. He brought Jennifer here because she wouldn't love him, because she was stubborn. The boy then takes off his disguise. It's actually been Wendy this entire time. She says that because Jennifer fell in love with Brown, she brought Stray Dog here. Now she realizes her mistake and gives us a gun to stop Stray Dog for good. Stray Dog then gobbles up Wendy and comes outside. At this point, we can get two endings. The bad ending happens if we use the gun against Stray Dog, shooting him with it. In this case, Stray Dog just falls over dead and the story is done. The tale itself tells us that Jennifer didn't keep her promise and didn't save anyone, but the good ending has much more to it. If we give Stray Dog the gun, then he apologizes to Joshua, realizing what he's done, and takes his own life. Jennifer and Brown run off into the light, and we get the final chapter of the game. January 1930, Once Upon a Time. We wake up as Jennifer, as a child in the past. A story lays on the bed, Once Upon a Time. This story is only made up of pictures, as two girls are tied to chairs together, and one girl makes it out with her dog, presumably Jennifer leaving with Brown. We can find some letters in this room that were traded between Wendy and Jennifer. Over time, Wendy had grown jealous of the bond between Jennifer and Brown. She felt like Brown was replacing her. We can explore the house here quite a bit to find many different pieces of information. We can even find Hoffman's journals detailing his lost fish and how Diana was his favorite student. He ended up leaving the orphanage at some point. This final chapter culminates, though, when we leave the orphanage, with Wendy outside, and head down the trail. Inside of a shack, we find Brown as a puppy. Jennifer gives Brown the collar that she made for him, and makes the same promise to him that she made to Wendy. Everlasting, true love, I am yours. She then locks him in the shed, vowing to forever protect him. Rule of Rose is an incredible story. On first glance, we can't be entirely sure what exactly happened here. But the first playthrough of the game is one where we examine theme rather than events. There are quite a lot of themes in the game, ones of love, loss, guilt, hierarchy, bullying, and trauma. The biggest theme, though, is one that the developers purposefully planted in the game. This is how children see the world. This was a big issue for the creators of Rule of Rose. They wanted to make a game that showcased the brutal and sometimes dark way that children view the same world that we do. Because children are innocent, they don't know crime, consequence, or what harm their actions can bring to the world. They can sometimes view things drastically different than us. We see this through their world. They do terrible things to each other. They bully other kids. They punish each other and push others down on the rank of the social hierarchy. They're humiliated, all at the chance of being able to be a part of the club, because being out of the conversation is about as good as having nothing. This warped reality exists in strange places. The airship in the orphanage, the ritual rooms and outdoor spots are all reflections of this dark worldview that the children have. We're also given a large theme of general coming of age. Jennifer's arc throughout the story sees her at the whim of all of the other kids in the orphanage. She's an outsider to this place. She has no idea even what the rules are, the order, the structure. She's belittled, made fun of for things she doesn't even know that she did. She's taken advantage of, toyed with, and thrown around. She's forced to play the game that the other kids want her to play. Until one day, the game goes too far, and Brown is killed. She's left alone. This moment is massive for the story and for Jennifer's character. I've always had a soft spot for dogs. I've had dogs my whole life. My dog is easily my best friend in this world, and I would do anything for him. The emotions and feelings that someone feels for their pet can't really be fully explained or put into words. For Jennifer, this is a whole other thing. Brown isn't just a pet for her, someone to keep her company when she's alone. He is a companion, somebody that won't belittle her, won't make fun of her, won't torture her, someone that will truly love her no matter what. He's the only one in the world, and even Wendy showed that she didn't truly care for Jennifer when her attention wasn't fully devoted to her. So with Brown gone, the line was crossed. Jennifer finally had the rage and confidence to stand up, to take the reins for herself and tell Wendy what she truly felt. This gained her respect, and overcoming the adversity of her life and time at the orphanage led Jennifer to be better off in the end. Sort of. The exact story is a little bit more complicated than that. A lot of the story in Rule of Rose ends up being metaphorical. A lot of these events did take place, but the large gist of the story is that Jennifer is experiencing her past again as an adult. She's taking a journey back through her memories. Now, some things are a bit more fantastical than they really happened, possibly due to the fact that these memories have been repressed and are now combined with insecurities, guilt, and trauma. Monsters that attack us could be representations of that, even the emotions that Jennifer has connected with the events or defense mechanisms from her own subconscious. The official, real story starts far back before the game begins. Once upon a time, Jennifer was riding with her parents in a luxury airship. This same airship crashed, and Jennifer was the only one to survive. While she wandered the forests, she was eventually found by a man named Gregory M. Wilson. This is the strange man that we see in-game, who eventually becomes Stray Dog. Gregory's son Joshua had gone missing, either dead or just ran off. It's not quite clear. Gregory did take Jennifer in, actually caring for her, but this was because he wanted his son back. He went so far as to dress Jennifer up as Joshua and refer to her by his son's name. Gregory was depressed and drank to ease the pain. Jennifer's room was in the basement, and eventually a girl from the orphanage nearby discovered her. Her name was Wendy, and the two girls began passing notes to each other. Jennifer eventually revealed to Wendy that she was actually a girl, and Wendy helped Jennifer escape the home. As they left, Wendy took Gregory's gun, and the girls traded something of each other's. Wendy gave Jennifer her rose brooch, and Jennifer gave Wendy her teddy bear. Wendy took Jennifer back to the orphanage, where the Red Crayon Aristocrat Club had already been established. This club was created because Wendy had been spreading rumors about Stray Dog, a monster that lures children out of the orphanage and eats them. They created the club with Wendy as its princess. When Jennifer arrived, still being called Prince, she had to start at the bottom of the food chain. Wendy and Jennifer fell in love, making a special promise to each other. But one day, Jennifer found a puppy who she named Brown. She showed this puppy to Wendy, but the girl became immediately jealous, wanting Jennifer only for herself. She didn't want to share Jennifer with anybody, so she started commanding the club to harass and bully Jennifer. She began spreading lies about her throughout the orphanage, even turning Hoffman against her. Eventually, one day, Hoffman, Martha, and Clara all disappeared. The children were left alone at the orphanage. Wendy ended up requesting that Brown be killed, and the club carried out this task. This is when Jennifer finally rose up and took a stand against Wendy. Jennifer was then made Princess of the Red Rose. After Wendy ran off, she started dressing up like Joshua to manipulate Gregory into helping her. She had trained him like a dog and brought him back to the orphanage. Stray Dog then went rampant and killed anyone that hurt his son, or who he thought was his son. This is when Wendy realized the consequences of her actions and gave Jennifer the gun. Gregory took his own life, and Jennifer was the only survivor of this ordeal as well. Jennifer had repressed these memories some time after. Our story begins when she is 19 years old, returning to the orphanage. The actual game takes place as Jennifer revisits her memories, digging up the past both metaphorically and kind of literally. She once again learns to stand up for herself, and the final scene of the game is Jennifer promising to protect Brown's memory for as long as she lives. A lot of the events that we see in-game actually took place in the real world. For example, the mermaid chapter was based on Hoffman's fish actually going missing. This was blamed on Diana, who may have really done it, but this got rid of Diana's reputation in the eyes of Hoffman, as she was his favorite student beforehand. Rule of Rose is a true gem. It's one of those games that's kind of been lost to time. That isn't to say that it doesn't have its fans and that people don't know what it is, but it definitely has a space in the history of psychological horror games, and I don't think that's something many people give it credit for. In an era when everyone was trying to recapture the magic of Silent Hill 2, I think Rule of Rose did that. Undercover, in the shadows, covered by the controversy that surrounded it. The game has such a unique tale that, for the time and even now, is pretty groundbreaking. 90% of the characters in the game are children, and that's something you definitely don't see from a horror game. The entire point of the game is based in the idea of perspective, seeing the horrors of the world from a child's eyes. The idea on its own could be taken in plenty of different ways, and I can think of about 20 terrible ones right now. It's a perfect interpretation and execution of the concept. The game is just vague enough to be interesting, to draw us into its world. It doesn't give anything away either, and like a lot of my favorite horror games, really makes the player search for the details along the way. It wants you to work for a timeline. If you're going to get it, then you're going to have to try. That makes the true story a lot more rewarding, but the tale doesn't succumb to the pitfalls of this genre in making the surface level story less interesting because it's so vague. If we experience the story without looking deeper, there are still morals there, still themes that get you thinking. There's a lot to be found without looking further, and that's just as important because most players aren't going to take the deep dive. The developers wanted to create something that was going to affect people, something that people could take into their real lives after the game was over, and I think they did that. They wanted to make something that wasn't just a mind-numbing experience, and Rule of Rose is anything but that. It has its faults, for sure. The combat is unfinished and unpolished. It's very rough around the edges, and it doesn't exactly feel good to fight enemies here. A lot of the larger encounters feel like waiting for the clock to tick down, rather than actually being actively involved. It becomes more of a passive experience than anything else. But in the end, Rule of Rose should be remembered for its compelling narratives, its boundary-pushing themes, its revolting environments and disgusting sound design, and its gorgeous, hair-raising soundtrack. Rule of Rose was met with mixed reviews upon release. It has a 59 on Metacritic. Most critics noted that the combat was frustrating, but the plot elevated it to certain higher levels. The game didn't do very well in sales, with a limited amount of copies even published. It's actually become one of the most expensive games at this point because of how rare it was. In 2021, Onion Games had expressed interest in remastering the game, but they didn't think that it was a likely scenario. This is one of those games that I would like to at least see remastered so that the game could be a bit more accessible for a modern audience that hasn't played it yet. And in the unlikely case that a remaster does happen, I'll be there, playing this fantastic game once again. Bye, Dad.